Hey everybody, my name is Sam Snow. I'm a fifth year PhD student in Richard Crohn's lab at Yale. Sexual conflict over mating is often characterized by sexually antagonistic coevolutionary arms races, like in the classic example, and my favorite example, duck genitals. So the males evolve ever more elaborate corkscrew phallus morphology, shown on the right, to aid in forced fertilization of females. In response, females evolve or co-evolve convoluted genital tracts, shown on the left. These function to physically block unwanted forced fertilizations in order to retain the indirect genetic benefits of mating with the preferred male. Lots of work has been done characterizing the various outcomes that might happen under sexual conflict, but in general it's considered that females can either resist more intensely or become desensitized to male coercive attacks. In either case, this often leads to further exaggeration of the male coercive traits and a continuation of the arms race. Here I want to present and analyze an alternative to this arms race scenario. Suppose that females, in the face of male coercion, can evolve an additional mate preference for a new male trait that functions by enhancing females' ability to choose their mates freely. This is pretty abstract. Let me show you an example from nature where evidence suggests this might be going on. This will be useful as a heuristic. So, this is the courtship arena of the tooth-billed catbird from Australia. It's just an arrangement of leaves on the ground. Females that arrive at these territories have never been observed for more than 3.8 seconds before being accosted by a male. Not a lot of time to evaluate a mating display. The tooth-billed catbird happens to be a member of the bowerbird clade, and one of the only members of that group that doesn't build a proper bower. This is the bower of a satin bowerbird. It's a really peculiar structure. It's not a nest. It's a courtship arena that's actually built by the male. When a female comes to visit the territory, she sits right in there. The male displays for the female in front of the bower, and she sits in there for up to several minutes evaluating the mating display. If the male wants to mate with the female and attempt copulation, he has to disengage from the display and actually go around to the back of the bower, where the female has the opportunity to either solicit the copulation or escape through the front. So fascinatingly, it appears that the bower structure itself functions specifically to protect females from unwanted coercive mating attempts. We're suggesting that rather than evolving direct resistance to unwanted male advances and touching off an arms race, females can actively remodel males by evolving mate preferences and male traits such as protective bower structure that enhance freedom of mate choice. Now, this seems a little bit counterintuitive because males should really not want to mate one of these things. It's likely costly and it hinders their mating opportunities. Now, this mechanism has been proposed verbally in various forms previously by Borgia and Crum, but whether it's possible or not is really difficult to know because it relies on complex interactions among several traits. So, theory model. We developed a 3-locus haploid population genetic model that has 3 loci, autosomal, that each have 2 alleles associated with them. First, there's T for the male display trait, B for the male bower structure, and R for female preference for bowers. Individuals having the 1 allele at a particular locus don't express that trait. Individuals that have the 2 allele at that locus do. There's some big assumptions that we're making that allow to have this system be a little more tractable. First of all, is that all females have a fixed preference for mating with attractive T2 males. Second is that all males will attempt to coerce females if given the opportunity. These conditions are sufficient to produce sexual conflict over mating that could otherwise lead to an arms race. Further, we have assumption bias mutation at the T locus. This maintains variation in the male display trait and allows sexual selection to be ongoing throughout the process. And then finally, we have small viability costs associated with the various traits. So mating progresses in 2 steps. Females first decide which territories they're going to arrive at, either randomly or based on the bowers that are present, if they have a preference for bowers. Once a female chooses a territory, she's either coerced and is unable to have the opportunity to evaluate the male display, or coercion fails and she's able to either accept or reject the male based on the display trait that he has, either unattractive or not. The model is parameterized as follows. We've got AT, which is the factor of attractiveness for the male display trait, that T2 allele. AB is the factor of attractiveness for Bowers, B2 allele. C is the baseline likelihood of successful coercion, and gamma is the effectiveness of the protection conferred by B2 Bower, such that the likelihood of a female getting coerced when she arrives at a particular B2 Bower is 1 minus gamma times C. So this means that bigger gamma means more protection. So first let's look at a scenario where gamma equals 0 and Bowers confer no protection from coercion to females. What you're looking at here is allele frequency of the various traits on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. Bowers are blue, female preference for Bowers is red, and the male display trait is black. Each run of the model that we do starts at an equilibrium frequency for the male display trait, the black one, that represents a balance between female preference and the effect of coercion. And then we introduce Bowers and preference for Bowers, B2 and R2, at a really low frequency and ask, can Bowers persist? In this case, we can see non-protective Bowers that confer no protection against coercion ultimately fail to evolve. We've got a small viability cost to the R2 allele, female preference for the Bowers, and in the absence of any additional selection on female preference, the preference for those Bowers decays and ultimately Bowers do too. So arbitrary sexual selection on Bowers is insufficient. Now let's look at a case where we allow the Bowers to be fairly protective. We see something really different. Bowers persist, and as a result, that T2 allele, that male display trait, the attractive display trait, also increases because females are getting what they want more often. I think it's a little bit easier to understand the process of what's going on that allows Bowers to persist by thinking about the genetic correlations among the traits. So Bowers initially evolved due to sexual selection from females that preferring the Bowers, which causes a correlation to develop between Bowers and the female preference for Bowers. As Bowers proliferate, Bowers become correlated with the male display trait because females that mate at protected Bowers are more likely to get that attractive male they want. This in turn produces a correlation between the male display trait and the female's preference for Bowers, which in turn produces indirect selection on the female Bower preference allele, which boosts sexual selection on Bowers, and so on. It's this feedback loop that allows the female preference for Bowers to overcome those valuability costs and allows Bowers to persist in the population. Another interesting feature of this is the oscillations you saw. So down here, this little graph here represents the proportion of matings in the population that are with those attractive T2 males, and then again time on the x-axis. This metric can be thought of as an index of the strength of sexual selection or the amount of freedom of choice that the females have through time. As Bowers evolve, you can see that, like we expect, right, these R2 females in orange that prefer the Bowers are getting an advantage because they're more likely to mate with attractive males. But now those Bowers are out there in the population, and the females that don't have an active preference for Bowers are just likely to stumble across one in their search for a mate and are able to sort of freeload and reap the benefits of a protected Bower without actually paying the cost of seeking one out. This means for a short time, the R1 females, those ones that don't have the preference, are actually favored briefly until Bowers decrease again, causing those oscillations. Although eventually, in all the simulations we've done, it does converge on an equilibrium where ultimately the males are able to coerce at a very low amount and females have remarkable increase in their ability to choose mates. So that was just one example. Let's look at the model outcomes through parameter space. So what you're looking at here is runs the model through parameter space, categorized by their outcome, whether Bowers persists or not. With blue, yes, and red, no, or pink, if that's what it looks like to you. The y-axis of each of these panels is the factor of attractiveness for the Bowers, AB. The x-axis is the effectiveness of Bower protection, gamma, And then each panel represents various combinations of the parameters for the factor of attractiveness for that male display, AT, and the likelihood of successful coercion down the side. Pretty clearly, you can see that female preference for the male display trait and female preference for bowers themselves promote the evolution of the bowers. More interesting is the effect of gamma. So the amount of, it seems like just conferring a little bit of protection against coercion isn't enough. Gamma needs to be strong enough such that the bowers become correlated enough with that attractive display trait in order to produce that feedback loop that allows bowers to persist. So there's a threshold here, although it seems that past that threshold, stronger and stronger gamma is favored. Also, somewhat counterintuitively, the likelihood of successful coercion is also a promoter of bower evolution. This is because more coercion means greater rewards for females that prefer protected bowers. Another major parameter that influences whether bowers evolve or not, of course, is that cost of preferring them, right, to females. Lower costs of preferring the bowers to females obviously increases the parameter space over which bowers will evolve. This is what we get if we actually remove those costs entirely, just to see what happens. In this case, bowers can actually evolve entirely due to arbitrary sexual selection, and no protection is actually necessary at all. But it seems that protected bower forms will still be favored over arbitrary bower forms. And we can see, and there's a little more work to do there, but we can see, for example, at these edges, examples where just adding a tiny bit of protection actually allows bowers to persist, where otherwise they would have failed under arbitrary sexual selection. So, in conclusion, I hope we quantitatively demonstrated the plausibility of a novel mechanism by which females select for male traits that enhance female freedom of mate choice as a result of sexual conflict over mating. So rather than always responding to advances in male coercion and interacting directly with male coercion, females can actually have an active role in shaping the male phenotype and maybe putting an end to that initial arms race. Having identified this process of remodeling, we think that this actually does apply much more broadly than just to this bower heuristic that I showed you guys today as an example. It should be possible whenever there's sexual conflict over mating. For example, we're hypothesizing that remodeling and deweaponization may have played a role in the evolution of reduced body size dimorphism and male canine teat size in early humans. So, and I'd be happy to talk about that with you guys more later. So we're hoping that the results of this model will be useful in identifying more and diverse examples of this process going on in nature that have gone unappreciated. So actually, if you have any ideas yourself, please come let me know if it reminds me of your system. With that, I'd like to thank a bunch of people, and I guess I should shamelessly plug myself as finishing my PhD soon too. Thanks very much.